We are gathered here today to celebrate and honor the life of Biotechvore and the many and horrific deaths that it inflicted upon miniatures of all armies and all factions across infinity. Indiscriminate in its utter disregard for your preferred playstyle, Biotechvore stands as a testament to how messy, violent, and short a game of infinity can be. Biotechvore is one of my favorite scenarios, and today, possibly for the last time on this channel, we are playing Biotechvore as a celebration and farewell of the scenario being rotated out alongside a lot of scenarios in the recently released ITS Season 17. Today, we're playing Tohaa against the Tardy Army Corp, and let's get into the armies. Now, Tohaa historically have always been a faction that can perform very well in some ITS scenarios. Even at the peak of ITS hackathon style of scenarios, where you had entire rosters of scenarios at events, where every scenario, all three or all five, would have hacking bonuses that Tohaa would sit there and go, "Am I a joke to you?" They could still play many of those scenarios very effectively because of their various unique tools and the way that they played. And Biotechvore was a scenario that has historically existed in the ITS pack, which they are quite good at. In Biotechvore, the primary demand the scenario makes of you is, firstly, escape your deployment zone and get into the midfield, and then secondly, have a big fight in the midfield at those kind of closest ranges, and Tohaa excel at both of those things. They excel at getting out of their deployment zone, usually with their entire army, thanks to their many link teams, and although these aren't full 5-person link teams, this list is comprised of many 3- and 2-man teams, and generally speaking, each of those teams will generate enough orders to get the team itself at least escaped. And then once you are in the midfield and having a big scrap, Tohaa really can excel there. Tohaa are not a bad faction at long range, but they don't excel there. But at close range fighting, they have lots of visibility control, good short range gunfighters, weird zone of control AROs, durability. They just scrap quite well once you're fighting in that kind of environment. And so, with Biotechvore as the scenario that we're playing, I'm playing Tohaa. Now, because this is a game of Biotechvore, it is just a casual game with a friend. This is not for a tournament, and so we're also using this as an opportunity to try out a couple of those things, and the first of those you can see second on the list there. So after our obligatory Sukhwel HMG, we then have an Ektros Vulcan Shotgun +1 burst. This is in the list because I have said many times now that there are a lot of very good boarding shotgun +1 burst profiles in Infinity N5, and I kind of feel like I like basically all of them. In response to that comment, channel supporter Christian Ebert dropped me a line with the message, "Hey, why not try the Ektros Vulcan shotgun then? It's a shotgun +1 burst. If you like all shotgun burst boarding shotguns, it's basically the same thing, so give it a shot." Alright, alright, we'll do that at some point, and this is the first opportunity I've had to play Tohaa, and so we're slamming it into the list. So we've got a team of a Sukhwel, the Ektros, and the McCall. We then have a smaller team of a Tagma, a Kael'thas, and a McCall. This is really just 3 dudes that can get themselves out of the Biotechvore zone. This is not a high utility fire team. I will have the Tagma pretending to be Attack Whale, but these guys are all cheap, they generate orders, they move forward, and maybe they can fight a little bit. They're mostly a concession to the scenario. In another scenario, I would have these guys split up, hanging out in the back, probably not even taking the Tagma. We then have a Rasail Lieutenant with Spitfire. Definitely another experimental piece here. I still like Attack Wheel Officer Lieutenants because 2 free orders to place Eclipse Smoke Grenades is good. But the Rasail is pretty muscular, it brings a lot of wounds for a reasonable number of points, and I've wanted to give him more of a shot, just Rasails generally, I've wanted to give them more of a shot, and this felt like a good environment for it. We then have a 2-person fire team of a Sukhwel Forward Observer and a McCall. Now this is a fire team that is on the cusp of greatness. I've used it a couple of times, and basically what you're doing here is having the McCall as a smoke thrower to get the Sukhwel into close range, and then the Sukhwel carries the team. Burst 3+1 special die on Mimetism, the K1 combi rifle, fighting in range bands of its choosing is good. It's also a specialist, and the whole package is not too expensive. What you will be kind of inclined to do is go, but there's also a McCall in there. I could get into close combat, and you can, and sometimes you will, but McCall in close combat in N5 suffer from one of the most severe cases of wet noodle syndrome that I think exists in Infinity, mostly just because of an oversight, I think, from Corvus Belli in terms of giving them a close combat weapon with anything resembling a decent power. McCall do not hit hard enough to get them into close combat with anything that you might spend the effort to set up and execute a close combat attack against, which kind of sucks. But hey, it's 14 points for a regular order and linked Eclipse grenades. That is worthwhile, even if Corvus Belli, should you be listening to this, please give McCalls like damage 5 on their CCWs. They really, really need that. We then have a diplomatic delegate, rounding the combat group out to 10, and then in combat group 2 we have another experiment here, the Nickel ambush unit. Now, Nickels are one of those pieces where at the beginning of N5, everyone saw the viral change and went, well, this sucks now, and stopped using it. And I am not 100% sure that that was the correct take. Yes, the changes to viral have significantly reduced its damage output against some targets. But if you stop and assess on a game-by-game basis, there are still plenty of games where the damage the nickel represents is significant, but that kind of isn't really the point, and isn't really why I think that the nickel being discarded was the bad take. The nickel is one of those things, it's a quintessential ARO piece. And so its goal is not always necessarily to kill something. Killing things is a bonus. Its goal is to stall. Its goal is to make the opponent have to deal with it before they can do anything else. And the fact that models with structure don't take the extra save against it doesn't actually hugely interfere with that. It is still a ballistic skill 12, MSV1 sapper sniper that can be given a symbiomate, and those qualities still kind of let it execute more or less on the play that it was always trying to make. And so in this scenario in Biotechvore, where I don't actually need to kill anything in ARO for my AROs to be lethal to my opponent, because every order my opponent spends dealing with a sapper sniper is one fewer order they have to get units out of the Biotechvore zone, I was quite happy to experiment with it, even not knowing what I would be playing against when I wrote this list. We then have a motorized bounty hunter. I would like this to be a Libertos, but a Libertos cannot easily under its own power escape the zone. Then we have a Kriegel agent, a Kelta chain of command, and a McCall. And this fire team is a significant part of why I would actually like that motorized bounty hunter to be a Libertos, because this fire team is doing something that my friend Ed has been doing for a while now, which is attempting to basically move forward and create an annoying strong point. Sixth Sense Fairware is just valuable and good and can really be a pain for your opponent to deal with, as can Sixth Sense Mirrorball as an ARO, but it works even better when it can be layered with deployable weapons like mines. If I had the points, the SWC, and if it was a different scenario, I would be trying to get some kind of a mine layer to synergize with this team, but ultimately the list is under constraints, not least of which is I have to take an Actros in this list due to the list challenge. And so for now, we're just dabbling with the Kriegel. Overall, this is a fine, acceptable, playable kind of Tohaa list. It's making multiple concessions, it's a casual game, and it is serviceably enough built for Biotechvore. Now, playing against me in this game, we have Tardy Army Corp, and there is something of a story to be told here, because when I hit my friend Chris up for a game, and we settled on Biotechvore as the scenario, I made the comment, man, I've been on kind of a vanilla Ariadna kick recently, I can't play vanilla Ariadna in Biotechvore. Chris heard that, read that as me merely expressing that the decision to play Ariadna would be a significant challenge, but that I was embracing it anyway, and so turned up with Tartary Army Corp so I wouldn't be suffering alone. The look that he gave me when I told him I was in fact playing Tohaa is something that should be memorialized perhaps in statuary. But credit to him for bucking up, knuckling down, and playing through a Tartary versus Tohaa in Biotechvore game kind of anyway. So look, this list is also a little bit not good. It's Tardy Army Corp, and it starts with a war driver. I think, and in fact I know, Chris's plan here really was just to try and accept that he would take casualties, horrific casualties, but pip me on classified, which is part of how the most recent version of Biotechvore is scored. And that means having access to a hacker, and in Tartary Army Corp, that means a war driver. We are not off to a good start here, but we'll rally a little bit with a Dynamo duo. If you have been playing either Tartary or Vanilla Ariadna in N5, you will have very quickly have come to love these guys. I personally have had, I think, 3 or 4 games with them now in Vanilla Ariadna, and however you configure this fire team, it is just very useful. Firstly, not unreasonably costed. Even this team, on the cheaper side, 29 points for 2 models. That is not expensive. And for that, you get 2 Ballistic Skill 12 linked mine dispensers. That's excellent. And linked Ballistic Skill 12 smoke grenade launchers, i.e. very long range smoke. That's just very useful. And then finally, both models are fast and serviceable enough at gunfighting if you need them to be. I have been enjoying just running a pair of 14-point dynamos. The Panzerfaust and submachine guns are kind of interesting and awkward for my opponent to deal with as pseudo-ARO pieces some of the time. And otherwise it's just two dudes that spend two orders and lay four mines, maybe throw some smoke, and then reload. In this case, their utility is obviously that they can get very efficiently out of the Biotechvore zone. We then have a Ratnik. Now, Chris has fallen prey to one of my classic N5 blunders here, and not found the points to make the Ratnik into the Spitfire profile. He won't end up being aggressively punished by it, but something I have just been finding over the course of N4 is that gunfighting, and especially what constitutes apex gunfighting with a few kestrel-shaped spikes, people are more kind of average in terms of gunfighting now. 5-person links don't give the huge spikes to ballistic skill that they used to. Not everyone is playing really high main battle tags, and so unless you're playing something like Kestrel, which just sort of shits all over everyone else, there's a lot of ballistic skill 13, ballistic skill 14, mimetism, etc. In that environment, it might be tempting to go, oh, well, I can get away with a ballistic skill 13 burst 3 gun in the form of the heavy rocket launcher on a piece like a Ratnik. I have been finding that fails me a lot. And the Ratnik is the kind of piece where, look, you could spend some more points and go to burst 5 and just spray bullets at something and put a flaw under your performance. In this case, it's not going to punish Chris, and the Ratnik will mostly do fine, but it is a change that I would be looking to make. Otherwise, the Ratnik has tactical awareness orders. It's basically a very, 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 very lightweight tag. That's fine in this scenario. It can get itself clear by itself. Cool. We then have two Omandinos doing the same thing. Irregular and impetuous, they can clear the zone by themselves by combining those two orders. They are self-sufficient, and having cleared the zone, they are very good at doing classifieds. They are engineers with decharges, and they can fight and trade in a pinch. Colonel Veronin is an excellent lieutenant. Counterintelligence and strategics are both very valuable. There is the slight note that in Biotechvore, getting a move 4-4 silhouette 4 model clear of the zone is a bit of a challenge, but Chris would manage that. We then got a Frontoviki paramedic, a Line Kazakh forward observer, and a Spetsnaz parachutist. One of the things Chris is doing here is some kind of old Biotechvore wisdom, where yes, confused deployment is a rule. You can brute force confused deployment, and if you do, it's actually really beneficial. Now, Strelocks, which we'll see in Group 2, aren't actually the models I would generally use for it. Forward deployment is not nearly as good, in fact it's not sufficient in Biotechvore, but things like infiltrators can just, if you make the roll, and Ariadne infiltrators will usually need to roll a 10, which means half of your infiltrators will succeed, half of your infiltrators begin the game safely in the zone, and the orders that they generate can then be used to get other things out. Given that in general it takes about 2 orders to get a 4-4 movement model clear, you're saving a lot of orders even if, say, half of your infiltrators fail. Now, a Spetsnaz parachutist is making a similar kind of gamble. I'm not sure I would really use it over something like an infiltrator, but it will do some cool things in this game. And hey look, there's one of those boarding shotgun +1 bursts. Finally, in Combat Group 2, we have a second Spetsnaz with a HMG, just generally talking about Spetsnazes. Like a few things in Ariadne that historically have been very good, 39 points for these guys maybe doesn't quite cut it in N5. Could very easily accommodate a points decrease and still be fine, but in absolute terms and ignoring the points cost, if you can ever ignore something's points cost, still a dangerous gunfighter. We then have 2 Strelok forward observers and a Scout forward observer. These Strelocks ultimately are cheap, and I wouldn't mind them in any non-Biotechvore scenario, but forward deployment +8 is not nearly as good as infiltration in a scenario where you have a constrained deployment zone. Strelocks cannot escape the Biotechvore zone by succeeding their forward deploy confused deployment roles. So I would be looking to cut points and make them scouts, but hey, Chris is doing what Chris is doing. And then finally we have a Borsuk, and frankly, given that this list has 3 points spare, I'm just going to say taking this is wrong. Chris, you may not own 3 dynamos, but this Barsuk should just be a dynamo. You have the 3 points, and there is a colossal performance difference, especially in Biotechvore, between an unlinked dynamo and this poor Barsuk. However, we are not here to criticize excessively. This is dining room table infinity to farewell Biotechvore as a scenario and have a messy fight. And so let's get into the game. So Chris wins the lieutenant role. I roll a 14 tragically on that one game that I elect not to take a willpower 14 lieutenant, and he snap picks going first. I think you can definitely play Biotechvore from first or second if the table is good enough for it, but he has a counterintelligence lieutenant and kind of a bad list, and I do not begrudge him his choice. I'm going to be deploying on the right side of the table, which I have picked mostly looking for good places to deploy a nickel, where I might be able to pin Chris back a little bit. Chris has deployed with an absolute sea of camouflage markers. You can see a whole bunch of them in this space here. These are a mix of Mimetism 3 and Mimetism 0, revealing the presence of things like Strelocks and Spetsnazers and the Barsuk. The Dynamo Duo is deployed in the shadow of this building here, able to move around in either direction if it needs to, but they are fast enough really to get wherever they might want to go over the course of the turn. And then the Ratnik is also deployed centrally kind of in the shadow of this building, looking to use its tactical awareness order to move up and kind of contest this central space here. Ermendinos are scattered around, one is behind this building, one is behind this building, and then a Strelok that tried and failed to make an infiltration or superior deployment roll is behind this building on the right corner of Chris's deployment zone, but as Chris's reserve drop, we will see a camouflage marker come down over here. Now this is a fascinating play. I was looking forward to seeing what would be going on here, and there was absolutely method to Chris's madness. Under normal circumstances, if you're making infiltration rolls, particularly this far up the table, that means in TAC it has to be a scout, so I knew it would be a scout. But my expectation would be, oh hey, deploy behind the halfway line in any of these positions, just get into a good spot, that's gotten a model out of the Biotechvore zone for free, awesome. Chris, what are you doing? What are you doing taking the extra -3 and succeeding, coming all the way over here? Well, we will find out on my first turn. Finally, Veronin is just down around in this position here behind these signs with his friends in his fire team. One of the things that is missing from Chris's list and which he would really benefit from having is a Frontovic MSV1 AP sniper. There are a number of things that you could feasibly cut. It links very nicely in with just the generic mix of Veronin, Kazakhs, etc., benefits from the special die, and just gives you something resembling a long-range gun, and especially in a scenario like Biotechvore, where the initial engagement ranges are very long due to the small deployment zones, very solid. I was expecting that as Chris's reserve. I was expecting it to drop to counter something like my Nickel, for example, which it fights quite well, as they both have MSV1s. But then this hilarious abomination of a camouflage marker appeared instead, and I'm like, well, I'll have to see what's going on there, won't I? Now, for my part, I have just deployed a bevy of fire teams, but approximately we have behind this building on the right or the upper side of my deployment zone, we have that team that had the Tagma schema. I don't really want it to be doing any fighting, it's just going to be running around in this direction seeking safe ground. We then have quite a bunch of teams, so we have the 2-person and the 3-person teams with the Sukwales, that's the Sukwale HMG and the Sukwale Forward Observer, all scattered in and around this position. They could form different links if I wanted them to, but I formed them up as I showed them off in the army preview. But they are looking to either punch or smoke their way out, and so I've given them the best choice of angles to move out of the deployment zone. They could move up across this high ground, they could escape up into these alleys here. Any of those are potentially options. They could even hook up and around and move towards the upper side of the table there. They're best positioned to find a good place to fight. Now the Nickel Sniper is deployed on this rooftop. Ideally, I would like it to be even further back to make maximum use of its range, but it's the best place I could put it in this deployment zone where it will pin Chris's forces a little bit in place. And then we have the Diplomatic Delegate, the Motorized Bounty Hunter, and basically the entirety of Combat Group 2 deployed on and around this building here. The Rassail will be my reserve drop since it's not packing any equipment, and I just put it down, knowing that this is almost certainly a scout, I just put him down in a position where if there's any real funky shenanigans, I might have just one more piece to keep the fire team elements, etc. over here alive. So, Chris is going first. I elect to spend a command token to limit the number of command tokens he can spend on coordinated orders, since I assess that he will need to do that, and this will have zero effect on the game. I figured since this was the last time I would probably ever be playing Biotechvore, I may as well try that option out. I've never done that before, but I did know that Chris had counterintelligence, and it did nothing. So hey, I learned. Thank you for science. Now, Chris begins his turn with some impetuous, but then basically gets straight on into what the heck is this thing doing here. As it moves around, it gets discovered on the way through because I'm able to hold things like eraser arrows against it, and if I eraser it while it's there, it's almost certainly dead at the end of round, because it can't spend any more orders, it will trigger Biotechvore and fall over. But that is not a concern to Chris. He moves again into contact with this building here and attempts to do mapping. Tragically, utterly tragically, he fails and just gets shot, etc. and died. But I absolutely respect the chutzpah of trying to do mapping in Biotechvore. I think he had really rough choices for this particular card, but mapping is one of those classified objectives that you accomplish like one time in 4 or 5 that you draw it, and trying to do it in Biotechvore is the hardest and riskiest option ever, and he got himself a 65% chance to succeed it. So, thumbs up, Chris. However, your scout is now dead. Now, the remainder of Chris's turn is a fairly comfortable rollout into the zone. There are a mix of coordinated orders, even a couple of cautious moves, and ultimately what he will be doing is getting the Ratnik up and around here, moving into a position where it can engage my nickel, and then not get punished, basically. This is one of those face-to-face rolls where, due to the fact that he is burst 3, he's 3 dice on 10s, I'm 1 dice on 12s, that could have taken a really long time, particularly since I have a symbiote. But he landed a hit on the first shot of the attack. I failed to save with the nickel, and I made the decision that I would like to have the nickel's order, even though the nickel would die to Biotechvore. I wanted the nickel's order to move things forward on my first turn just a little bit more. Not sure that was correct. It's the kind of thinking that would make a lot more sense in a game that wasn't Biotechvore, where the nickel would drop prone and then be a piece for the rest of the game. But I did make that call. That, the nickel dropping down, basically meant that Chris was able to more or less move forward. The only other arrow I had was that the Sukwell HMG was standing, but smoke gets him past the Sukwell HMG, and so over the course of the turn, his entire army just about gets out of the Biotechvore zone, with the only casualties being that the scout, of course, goes all the way to dead, and he is forced to leave both the Barsuk and the War Driver behind, so they fall over as well. Everything else gets clear, and is able to occupy spaces that are more or less safe, all things considered. So, I begin my turn, Chris has occupied the midfield, and I have to fight my way clear. The Ratnik is present as an ARO piece, and there are a bunch of mines that have been laid over here by the Dynamos, who have skirted their way up all the way around the side of the table. Those mines are a problem, because I don't have enough orders or really the pieces to deal with them safely, but that's okay, we've got a plan for this. We have a model in our army that can at least probably spang some mines safely and let us move forward. And so, our first activations, we will impetuous forward with the bike, etc. But our first activations are activating the Sukwell HMG team, which includes the Ektros. The Sukwell is going to engage the Ratnik, while the Ektros runs in this direction, using its 6-2 movement to trigger both mines. Now, I won't be able to dodge, but the Ektros is armor 3, which means it will usually pass one, fail one, but it fails both. Okay, bit of a shame, but the Ekros is a 3-wound model, which means it's not dead, which means that I have successfully disarmed both of these mines by feeding them 2 of the 3 wounds of my heavy infantry. The Sukwale has a brrrt gunfight with the Ratnik and is not really able to make much progress, but it is able to basically shoot its way clear through multiple face-to-face rolls that allows this team to get up and around toward the midfield and kind of hunker down. I do also have a Symbio Bomb on the Ektros that I will spend as part of this advance because it is able to get up into zone of control of Colonel Veronin here, and I will drop 2 end games into Colonel Veronin in an attempt to put him down, and it will fail. So good job, Ektros. You have failed everything I wanted you to do so far this game. However, we have other lines of engagement, and the main other fight that will happen is that the secondary fire team, consisting of the Sukwell Forward Observer and McCall, will use smoke that has been laid basically to get up and around in this direction and take a shorter range gunfight against the Ratnik. And where the Sukwell HMG spanged off of the Ratnik multiple times, the Ratnik does have good armor, right? Totally reasonable. Getting inside 16, putting it at a gunfight where it has no good options because it's only got 16 to 32 and 0 to 8 good range band guns, I just take it all the way to dead in one shot. So excellent work, Sukwell Forward Observer. You have thoroughly paid for yourself. Otherwise, we're just going to occupy space as best we can and get everything clear. And we will be building a Fort Kickass in this space here, getting Ferroware positioned very aggressively so that anything that moves in to attack the zone has to deal with being erased, which should hopefully make this kind of Fort Kickass nice and safe. I would love to also have some mines to defend it, but that obviously wasn't an option in this particular case, so we just build it as durably as we can. Finally, at the end of the turn, I only have one model in the Biotechvore zone. It's the nickel, and the nickel dies, but that is the price I always knew I was going to pay. Now, stepping into Chris's second turn, He's in that state which was kind of always going to materialize in this matchup, which is that just in terms of dudes left alive, because I am playing Tohaa and he is playing Tardy Army Corp, I have the wounds and the orders to get into the Biotechvore zone, I have made fewer sacrifices, so I am obviously up on attrition. He doesn't really have the tools to try and clock me on that at this particular case, but his plan is to try and do classifieds. Mapping is probably out of contention now, but other options exist. And to do that, a multi-pronged attack is going to be launched on this Fort Kickass that I have built. Firstly, we're going to have the Spetsnaz arriving. It is going to pass its Superior Deployment Zone roll and then immediately begin making willpower rolls to do net undermine, which it succeeds. I think it may also do something with the HVTs. By the end of this turn, Chris is going to be on about 2 classifieds complete. He's also going to be attempting to decharge this box here, and that is going to be something of a challenge because there is just an awful lot of my stuff in this room. The Ermandino and the Strelok and the Spetsnaz will all launch attacks from different angles, and while I am not able to kill any of them, I do isolate a bunch of them, and then he engineers them free, and then I isolate them again, and we're going to end up in a situation where basically there is just an awful lot of stuff and people hanging out in this space, and Chris will lay some mines and then pass turn and kind of make it my problem to unpick. The only other thing of note is that the Sukwale K1 claimed yet another victim as the Spetsnaz came around to try and engage her, but that is just not really a good range band fight even for a marksman HMG to have, and he ends up dropping unconscious in ARO. And so, beginning of my turn, we have the setup for what will have been the thumbnail that you will have seen at the start of this video, which is just an absolute horrific tale of violence that will happen in a very small space. And it is the exact kind of fight that you get from Biotechvore. Little bit of a comedy of errors, but what I am dealing with here is a Spetsnaz in cover watching many things, a Strelok with a mine next to it, and an Ermandino. This is a lot of stuff, and anything that I activate is going to potentially trigger multiple arrows on other different pieces, things like templates, chain rifles, mines, etc. But I have to clear all of this in order to push through and deliver that decisive advantage in Biotechvore. It's cool. I have some plans. The first plan is that the McCall is going to Impetuous. It can do so because it's safe along this rooftop. Not safe, it will trigger a mine, for example, but it can threaten the flamethrower while detonating the mine that the Strelok has made, and the detonation of the mine, thanks to other things on ground level being prone, won't get the mine killed. Won't get, sorry, my troops killed. Okay, all of that is excellent. There are any number of ways this can go well, and the way that it can go wrong is if Chris just passes like all of his armor rolls for most of a turn. And so my best laid plans, which were I'm going to use the McCall, I'm going to clear the mine, I'm going to kill some things, I'm going to use the Rassail, I'm going to use the bike, I'm going to use all of these different pieces to have some like good decisive engagements. Yes, I will sustain casualties, that will be worthwhile, produced instead this situation where everyone's dead and only the Rassail and like a couple of other things are alive. In the end, by the end of this turn, when all of the dust is cleared, I do have wounds on the Rassail, and I do still have the Kael'thar Chain of Command and the Kriegel agent alive. But otherwise, an awful lot of things have died in this space. The McCall, the Chaxa, the Diplomatic Delegate, the Motorized Bounty Hunter, etc. It was a wonderful hot mess, and is the kind of thing that you get in Biotechvore. Ultimately, though, at the conclusion of that raw and bloody firefight, enough of Chris's stuff was dead that he was basically wrapped up and knocked out of the game. I was also able to take some engagements on the upper side of the table, and although the Ektros once again failed to kill anything, ultimately I did put down one of the Dynamos and Colonel Veronin, and from here it was really just a matter of attempting to do some classifieds. The final ignominy for the Ektros was that the last classified I needed to do was to get a medium or heavy infantry inside zone of control of the enemy HVT. Chris's HVT is behind this billboard and building over here, and scan that HVT with a medium or heavy infantry. Cool. I've got the Ektros. The Ektros will do that. It will accomplish something over the course of this game. But the Tohaa players in the audience may go, Rob, the Ektros has taken 2 wounds. It has transmuted. It's not a heavy infantry anymore. It's a light infantry now. And in fact, I discovered that only after moving the Ektros all the way over into zone of control of that HVT. However, Very happily, I was bailed out by the fact that Rassails are still medium infantry, and so the lieutenant was, over the course of a turn, able to move his way over, scan the HVT, secure the HVT, and then I also did Predator with some neck stomping. And so, while we won't count score, I've done my classifieds. Chris has mostly failed to do. I think he's done one or two of his. I have absolutely killed a great many more things than he did. And so, this last game of Biotechvore, which has been brutty, nastish, and absolutely enjoyable, has wrapped up as it has a little bit of a tendency to do, with an awful lot of damage to both sides, but the Tohaa in this case coming out ahead. So, I hope very much that you've enjoyed this game. This video was released to pair with a retrospective on Biotechvore as a scenario, and an examination of how it serves as an example of the way that scenarios impact the games that we play and how scenarios are designed. We will be back next week with more Infinity content. With ITS Season 17 released, I will be looking to either get games in with Season 17 scenarios, or take a look at how you might play or build for Season 17, or some combination of the two. And so do let me know in the comments what kind of content you're looking for. Otherwise, and as always, I hope very much that you've enjoyed this, and I'll see you next week.